A storm raged over the mountain town of Silverpine when a desperate whisper cracked through the static of a phone line. "Daddy, please help us." For years, no one had listened. Two little girls in pink dresses, trapped behind closed doors, their ribs aching beneath the cruelty of a man who wore the mask of respectability. But that night, a battle-hardened soldier named Silas Ward and his loyal German shepherd, Ranger, answered the call. What unfolded would tear away the silence, expose the truth, and prove that sometimes the smallest voices, if believed, can shatter the darkest lies. Snow smothered Silver Pine in a slow, relentless hush, the kind of mountain storm that turned lampposts into candles of ice and roof lines into white altars. The town lay tucked beneath the pines as if under a quilt stitched by winter itself. Down Aspen Lane, where porches sagged with icicles and fences drew straight hymns in the drift, a small house kept a single window burning. Inside that trembling square of light, a phone call had already changed the gravity of the night. Silas Ward drove with both hands set low on the wheel, eyes narrowed against the ribbons of snow that slashed the windshield. 38 and carved by service, he carried that quiet, coiled strength particular to soldiers who have learned which fears deserve a name and which ones must be walked through. His hair was close cropped, a few threads of early gray at the temple, a pale scar stitched through his left eyebrow like a hinge. Once in Kandahar, a door had blown inward and the world filled with dust and absence. Since then he moved with a deliberate economy, saving words and spending courage. Divorce had trimmed his life to bone mail addressed to two houses, birthdays on a screen, but it had not uprooted the stubborn orchard of fatherhood he kept alive in the letters he never sent. In the passenger footwell sat Ranger, a black and tan German shepherd, with a chest like a barrel and eyes the color of amber trapped in resin. 6 years old, 80 pounds of muscled certainty, Ranger had learned to read the music between heartbeats. He was a working dog trained to track and protect, but there was something old soul in him, an almost chivalric patience. Once on a summer call-out, he had refused to leave a lost boy in a creek bed, bracing his body as a shield against the water until Silas lifted the child free. Since then, children were a vow he carried in his fur. Tonight he sat forward, ears pricked, nostrils writing invisible sentences in the cold air that leaked through the truck's vents. The radio hissed and settled. Silas replayed the thin sound of Grace's whisper. "Daddy, please. Brenna's coming." Hannah hurts until the syllables were knots in the reins of his attention. He took the last turn too fast, tires kissing the edge of the ditch before the truck corrected and shouldered into the drive. Snow feathered the porch. A plastic pink scooter lay half buried, like a summer secret winter had tried to keep. Silas cut the engine, the sudden silence a bell. "With me," he said. Ranger leapt down, his paws thumping softly on the drifted steps. The house's paint had peeled to the color of old paper, the wreath on the door listing, slightly, ribbon wet and dark. Through the fogged pane beside the jam, Silas caught a smear of motion. Brent Calloway's arm lifted, a leather belt glinting in the lamplight. Brent was a big man in the way, ex-high school lineman, turned soft without losing the swagger-wide shoulders, neat hair, a church usher smile that came easily in public. He wore respectability like a winter coat, well-fitted until you noticed the frayed seams. More than once the neighbors Walt Ellery, his mustache yellowed by coffee, and Joan Pike, who organized the pie table at the church bazaar, had praised Brent for clearing the sidewalks after storms, for shaking hands down the pews with the practiced warmth of someone who understood the exchange rate of charm. The mask sat straight until home closed around it. Silas tried the knob, found it locked and knocked once, hard enough to be heard over the weather. The belt arm froze, and for a beat, Brent's gaze flicked toward the door. "Police!" Silas called. Brief, untrue, a gambit to cut a second into two halves. When nothing moved but the snow, Silas stepped back, planted, and drove his shoulder into the jam. The frame cracked with a sound like a branch surrendering. He was already in motion as the door bent inward. Ranger knitting the space beside him, a low thunder brewing in his throat. The room smelled of old heat and lemons. A lamp with a fringed shade threw tired gold on the walls. In its circle stood two little girls, mirror images, as if God had tried to double the chance of mercy. Grace and Hannah, 7 years old, in pink dresses meant for birthdays, not for triage. Hems dirty where fear had dragged the fabric. Grace's hair was chestnut and stubbornly straight. Hannah's curled at the ends as if it couldn't help but hope. They both had the pale, pinched look of children who hold their breath when footsteps move down the hall. Brent's face turned full toward them, belt hand cocked. "Enough," Silas said, just that. The word not louder than the storm, but waited. Ranger's growl unfurled, no longer a warning, but a sentence. The belt twitched. In the same instant Ranger launched, a precise, disciplined burst of power, teeth locking onto Brent's forearm, the one that held the leather, his body twisting to pull the arm offline. Brent howled, surprise collapsing into anger, knees buckling as he tried to wrench free. Silas crossed the space in 3 strides, caught Brent's wrist, pivoted from the hips, and drove him down. The belt slithered under the coffee table like a thing embarrassed to be seen. "Stay," Silas told Ranger, and the shepherd released on the command, stepping backward between Brent and the girls, head low, eyes up. "Daddy?" Grace's voice arrived as a question made of thin glass. Silas's answer cracked open in him, but he kept his tone steady. "I'm here." He kept one forearm pressed across Brent's shoulder blades, hips pinning the fight, and with his free hand reached to pull the belt out of sight. "You can't," Brent started, but the sentence didn't know where to go without the belt to point it. A thin line of blood welled along his bitten forearm, bright as a lie under the lamp. "You're done," Silas said. It wasn't fury, it was weather. He fished his phone from his back pocket and thumbed the emergency contact for the Silver Pine Sheriff's Office. "Nora, it's Ward," he said when the line clicked. "Active domestic. Children present. Brent Calloway restrained at 118 Aspen Lane. Send a unit and medical check for 2 minors." "Copy," came Deputy Nora Whitaker's voice, all brisk mountain calm. Nora was Silver Pine born, mid-30s, tall, copper hair, usually braided under a beanie, a runner's posture that made her look both ready and unhurried. She had a talent for walking into volatile rooms and lowering the temperature without turning out the lights. Once, when a summer thunderstorm knocked out power on the north side, she'd gone door to door with a box of batteries and a pot of chili. People trusted the way she said good morning, like it was a promise she had the means to keep. "Units rolling," Nora added. "Do I need animal control?" "Negative," Silas said. "Ranger's on me." He pocketed the phone and only then let himself look squarely at his girls. Hannah had not moved, hands clasped around the soft ruff of Ranger's neck, face wet but set. Grace stood half a step behind her sister, chin angled in defiance that it had to grow up too fast. They were shaking lightly, the way aspen leaves tremble even when the air is embarrassed to say it's wind. "Shoes," Silas said gently, scanning the scattered room. He found 2 small pairs by the heater, bundles of mismatched socks tucked into them like hurried wishes, and crouched to slide them onto cold feet. Humor came to him like a candle he shielded with his hand. "I'll take rain checks on the fashion show," he murmured, and Grace's mouth, against her better judgment, twitched the smallest surrender to ordinary life. Behind him, Brent writhed once more, testing the weight of a man who had learned on other floors, in other rooms, how not to be moved. "You can't take them," he hissed. "Their mother—" "Will meet us at the station," Silas said, and the calm in his voice surprised even him. It felt like a bridge laid plank by plank over a river that had been rising for years. He pocketed the belt, an ugly souvenir to hand over with statements and photographs, then hauled Brent to the couch and kept one hand on his shoulder while he phoned Evelyn. Her voice, when it finally came, was tired, silk beautiful, and frayed. There are stories that make a woman choose between the truth she can live in and the lie that lets her sleep. Evelyn Hart had wrapped herself in the second until it scratched. "I'm coming," she said, and the line went quiet, not dead, as if both were listening to an old song they had once loved and could no longer sing. Sirens did not ride the storm. Nora preferred not to announce what could be handled with boots and breath. The cruiser's headlights wrote long bones through the snow as it slid to the curb. She entered with a practiced glance that measured blood, furniture, children, dog, and arrived at a decision. "Mr. Calloway," she said, voice level as a plumb line, "you'll stay seated. EMS will look at that arm at the station." Brent blustered discipline, misbehavior, a child who lied, and for every word Nora had a silence that did not yield. She cuffed him, read the rights that lived in her mouth like scripture, and passed him to the deputy behind her without touching his injured arm. Ranger stood once, made a single low sound, a note of punctuation, and Nora nodded to the dog as one professional to another. "Good work, partner," she said. Outside, the night met them with that hard, clean cold that makes breath look like the soul trying to slip out. The neighbor's curtains hiccuped. Walt Ellery's mustache appeared in a slit of yellow, then retreated as if pulled by a string. Across the street, Joan Pike's porch light clicked on. She opened her door a thumb's width, the draft tugging at her robe, and whispered to someone behind her. "It's the ward boy, I think." And that dog snow soundlessly found the girl's hair. In each small head, the flakes settled and melted, the first soft thing to touch them in hours. Silas lifted Hannah, then Grace, feeling the wiry truth of their thinness through the damp fabric, and settled them into the back of the cruiser where Ranger hopped in after them as if he had paid for both seats. The shepherd lay across their knees like a weighted quilt. The tremors slowed under his patient gravity. "We're going to the sheriff's office," Silas said, crouched in the open door, his breath fogging, his voice a low, steady metronome. "Deputy Nora will make sure you're warm." "I'll be right there." Grace nodded, her eyes still scanning every doorway, as if fear could grow there like mold. Hannah's small hand found Ranger's ear and rubbed the place. Only she seemed to know soothed him most. His tail thumped once, dignified, as if he did not want to appear unprofessional and could not help it. "Daddy?" Hannah said, the words soft but whole. "Yes, baby." "Can Ranger come?" The dog flicked his gaze to Silas, as if the question required paperwork. "Try and stop him," Silas said, and for the first time that night laughter rustled the girl's shoulders, a leaf of sound. Nora closed the door gently. The storm widened the world to a circle of light around the cruiser. The rest of Silver Pine erased to a chalkboard. Silas stood in that circle a moment longer, looking back at the house where his absence had grown teeth, and then forward at the cruiser where his daughters breathed the same air as the dog who had learned to catch falling things. He placed a palm on the cold metal and whispered a sentence only fathers and weather understand, and then the night carried them away. The sheriff's office of Silver Pine was a squat brick building, pressed against the slope of the mountain, its windows square and plain. But inside there was one room that had been painted softer than the rest. The safe room sat at the end of a quiet hall, the door muffling the clatter of radios and the scrape of boots. Its walls were pale blue, chosen long ago by a former sheriff's wife who thought children might find calm in color. A knitted blanket sagged over the back of a couch. A bookshelf leaned with picture books whose pages were stiff with dust. The light hummed overhead, too white, too steady, but it was better than shadows. Grace and Hannah sat pressed together on that couch, both wrapped in dry clothes borrowed from the evidence closet, sleeves falling past their small hands. Their hair was damp from melted snow, sticking to their cheeks, their pink dresses folded into plastic bags marked for processing. Grace, the elder by 2 minutes, held herself stiffly, chin lifted with a defiance that trembled at the edges. Hannah leaned sideways, cheek pressed into Ranger's thick fur, her small fingers knotting and unknotting the strands. Ranger lay stretched along the carpet, his body curved around them like a rampart, his breathing a steady drumbeat. Every so often his ears twitched at a sound outside, but he stayed low, eyes soft, as though the weight of 2 children had become his only mission. Silas sat across the room, his tall frame hunched forward, elbows braced on his knees, hands clasped too tightly. He looked at his daughters and saw both familiarity and foreignness, the shape of Evelyn's jaw in Grace, the tilt of his own brow in Hannah, but shadows of fear that belonged to Brent's house and not to his blood. His chest carried the press of words unsent letters folded in a footlocker, each beginning with "Dear Girls," each ending with "Love Dad," but none ever mailed. Regret collected on him like dust, and he wondered if his silence had been the first betrayal. Deputy Nora Whitaker entered, tall in her Navy uniform, copper hair tied back in a braid. She was 35, mountain-born, her pale freckled skin carrying the memory of high altitudes. Years earlier, she had lost a younger brother to a drunk driver on Highway 6, and since then her patience had hardened into something unshakable. She moved gently now, boots quiet on the linoleum, and she carried a clipboard, not like a weapon, but like a ledger of truth. She crouched slightly so her eyes were nearer to the girls. Grace, Hannah, my name is Nora. You are safe here. No one can come through this door without me knowing. Her voice was steady, warm at the edges, like a fireplace that asked nothing but presence. Grace glanced sideways, then down at Ranger, as if checking whether the dog would confirm the deputy's promise. When Ranger thumped his tail once, Grace spoke for the first time since the cruiser. He used the belt. The words cracked the air like thin ice breaking. Hannah's voice followed, softer. He said no one would believe us. Both girls curled tighter into the shepherd, who lowered his head into their laps. Nora wrote the words down without letting her eyes leave theirs. At the far corner of the room, another man leaned against the wall, arms folded. Lucas Byrne, assistant district attorney for Franklin County, was in his early 40s, with dark skin and a neatly trimmed beard flecked with gray. He wore a charcoal suit wrinkled at the elbows, a tie loosened as if courtroom polish had been traded for late-night stamina. Lucas had grown up in Denver, son of a school teacher and a janitor, and had worked 3 jobs through law school. His fire came from a single childhood memory, watching his mother plead for protection against a landlord who never faced consequence. Since then, Lucas had sworn to fight for those whose voices bent under weight. He listened intently, eyes focused not on his notes, but on the tremor in Grace's mouth, the stillness in Hannah's hands. Every word matters, he said quietly, because it tells the truth he tried to bury. Silas shifted in his chair, throat tight. He wanted to move closer, to fold both girls into his arms. But he saw the way they clung to Ranger, and he swallowed the ache. It was the dog they trusted, not him, not yet. He had been gone too long, had missed too many nights when shadows had pressed at their door. He closed his eyes and remembered writing one of those unsent letters under a desert moon, sweat smudging the ink. If I could, I'd be there to chase the monsters, he had written. The letter never left the camp. Tonight he watched his daughters and thought, the monsters had moved in while he was away. Nora straightened and nodded to Lucas. We'll document the injuries. Photos, medical exam. Then we file charges. She spoke briskly, but her glance at Silas carried weight. You did right bringing them in, Lucas added. We'll need testimony. For now, keep them safe. Let them rest. The evidence from the house will speak loud. The girls grew silent again, shoulders pressed, their breath hitching as if memory had teeth. Ranger lifted his head, rested it across Hannah's knees, and looked up at Grace with eyes amber and sure. Something shifted in Grace's small face. She leaned forward and whispered, almost to the dog, We're not liars. Ranger blinked slowly, tail brushing once against the floor. Nora wrote the words and Lucas exhaled as if a door had finally opened. Silas pressed his hands together, feeling the sting of nails in his palm, and spoke for the first time since entering the room. You are believed, he said, voice low but steady, aimed at his daughters though they did not look at him. By me, by Nora, by Lucas, and by him. Sapru. He nodded toward the shepherd, who adjusted his weight as if to sign the statement. The hum of the fluorescent light filled the pause. Outside, the storm rattled against the windows, snow whispering down Silverpine's roofs. Inside, 2 small voices had cracked open silence, and a father listened with both shame and hope. The morning after the storm, Silverpine lay quiet under a dull gray sky. Snow melt dripped steadily from the eaves of houses, the streets muffled by slush, and yet beneath that calm lingered the tension of what had been uncovered. At the sheriff's office, Deputy Nora Whitaker studied the freshly signed warrant and gathered her team. There would be no more delay. The truth hidden in Brent Calloway's house had to be brought into the light. Nora led the way back to Aspen Lane. Tall, mid-30s, her copper braid tucked under her cap, She carried the authority of someone who had learned to speak calmly in storms. Her eyes missed little, her manner steady. She had buried her own grief years earlier, losing a brother to a drunk driver. And since then, her patience had sharpened into resolve. To her, protecting children was not procedure. It was penance. Beside her walked Detective Maria Lopez, lean and purposeful. In her mid-30s, Mexican-American, Maria's dark eyes carried years of experience reading lies off lips and silence off walls. She rarely wasted words, and when she did speak, it was with the precision of a scalpel. A past case involving a neglected boy who hadn't survived still haunted her, shaping the steel in her tone. She would not let another child's story end in silence. Silas followed, not in uniform but with a soldier's stride, shoulders squared against the weight of memory. Ranger padded at his side, tail stiff, ears pricked. The dog's presence steadied him. Loyalty and motion, muscle and instinct tuned to the faintest tremor of threat. In war, Ranger would have been the scout. In Silverpine, he had become guardian of Silas's daughters. The Calloway house looked smaller in daylight. Its clapboard siding sagged, shutters drawn tight as if trying to keep secrets inside. A hush had fallen over the street. From behind curtains, neighbors peered, the same neighbors who once praised Brent for mowing lawns and greeting them with a smile. That mask was beginning to slip. Nora gestured to the back. The cellar door clung to the foundation like a scar. Its wood was swollen, its padlock old but intact. Maria examined the ground. Tracks in the snow, half covered by the storm, leading to and from the door. "He's been here recently," she murmured. Nora gave a nod. Silas's breath clouded in the cold as he approached. Ranger stopped just short of the door, head lowered, ears pinned. A low growl rumbled from deep in his chest. Silas knelt beside him, palm brushing the shepherd's fur. "Easy, boy." But Ranger's body told him what he already felt in his bones. Whatever lay inside was foul. The padlock gave way under Maria's bolt cutter, clattering to the frozen ground. The door opened with a long groan, releasing a draft of damp air that smelled of mildew and something metallic that stung the back of the throat. One by one, they descended the concrete steps, flashlights cutting thin beams through the gloom. The cellar was small, its walls lined with shelves of cracked jars and peeling paint cans. Water dripped steadily from a pipe, each drop echoing in the silence. Ranger sniffed the edges of the room, his claws scratching against damp stone, before stopping in front of a stack of boxes. He froze, body taut, then growled again. Maria moved the boxes aside, flashlight beam catching a wooden chest buried against the wall. Its edges were warped, its lid darkened by age. She lifted the lid with deliberate care. Inside lay the first artifact, a belt. Leather cracked and stiff, its edges stained a dark maroon that needed no explanation. Silas's throat constricted as he looked at it. He had opened caches in war zones, but never had his hands trembled like this. Next came a notebook, its pages curled, filled with angular handwriting. Maria flipped it open, her lips tightening as she read aloud. "She must learn silence. Disobedience demands punishment. No one will believe her." The words were jagged echoes of what Grace and Hannah had whispered in the safe room. At the bottom of the chest, hidden beneath broken toys and scraps of cloth, lay a cracked porcelain doll. Taped inside its hollow body was a memory card. Maria held it up, her face lit briefly by the reflection of her flashlight. "This is what nails him," she said, her voice steady but edged with quiet anger. From the top of the stairs, Brent's voice carried down. He had been brought along under custody, his wrists cuffed, his expression coiled with defiance. "You don't know what you're looking at," he snarled. "Those are private things. Discipline. Kids lie." His words were brittle, but his eyes betrayed the tremor of fear as Ranger snapped his head toward him, teeth bared in a warning growl. Brent stepped back instinctively, mask fracturing. Silas stood at the threshold of the cellar, one hand braced against the frame. The sight of the chest was a blow deeper than shrapnel. This wasn't a hidden cache of enemy weapons. It was a vault of cruelty carved into the lives of his daughters. His hands shook, memory overlapping. Doors kicked down overseas, rooms cleared under threat of explosives, but here the threat had been in his own bloodline, and he hadn't been there to stop it. Ranger looked back at him, amber eyes steady, pulling him back from the edge of rage. Nora closed the lid firmly. "This house is a crime scene," she said, her tone crisp as a gavel. "Everything gets bagged, logged, and guarded." Maria nodded, already sealing evidence bags, careful hands moving like ritual. They climbed back into the daylight, the cold air sharp in their lungs. Neighbors who had once waved at Brent now kept their curtains drawn. The illusion of his decency was cracking, one layer at a time. Silas lingered a moment at the cellar door, whispering to no one, "Never again." Ranger pressed close to his leg, as if to anchor him to the ground he stood on. The courthouse of Franklin Ridge rose above the square, like an old sentinel of stone, its pillars darkened by decades of storms, its doors polished by countless hands. Inside, the air was solemn, charged with the expectation of judgment. Word had spread quickly through Silver Pine neighbors, who once praised Brent Calloway's steady handshake, and Sunday Smile now came to witness whether those gestures had only been a disguise. The gallery was filled with townsfolk in heavy coats, their murmurs weaving through the chamber until the bailiff's gavel called for silence. At the plaintiff's table, Silas Ward sat in a plain navy suit, the lines on his face sharpened by weeks of strain. His daughters Grace and Hannah were absent from the room, shielded from the spectacle, but their presence was in every breath he drew. At his side, Ranger lay at attention near the bench, permitted by special order to remain. The shepherd's amber eyes swept the crowd, alert yet calm, a quiet reminder that loyalty sometimes stood taller than law. Across the aisle, Brent Calloway looked smaller than he had in the sheriff's custody. Dressed in a gray suit that fit too neatly, his hair combed with mechanical precision, he attempted to project respectability, but the tremor in his hands betrayed him. His lawyer, Richard Calloway, not a relative, but a man known for pulling threads of doubt from tattered cloth, stood to speak. Tall, mid-50s, thinning blonde hair swept back. His angular jaw and sharp nose lent him the air of calculation. His reputation was built on technicalities, on weaving strict fathers into narratives of discipline misunderstood by softer generations. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began smoothly, "what we have here is not cruelty, but correction. My client, Mr. Calloway, sought only to instill responsibility in children. Yes, a belt was used, old-fashioned, perhaps, but discipline has long been the cornerstone of raising moral youth. We must not mistake a firm hand for abuse, nor let children's exaggerations sway us from reason." His words floated, practiced, designed to echo doubts in the jury's minds. Lucas Byrne, the assistant district attorney, waited until the defense sat before rising. His dark suit carried creases from long nights, but his voice was measured, steady, with the conviction of a man who remembered his own mother's pleas ignored by authority. He walked with purpose to the center of the courtroom, his eyes moving across the jurors. "Discipline," he said, "does not break ribs. Discipline does not force a child to wear long sleeves in July to hide bruises, and discipline does not come with threats like—" He raised his voice suddenly. "No one will believe you. You are nothing." With a nod to the technician, Lucas directed the evidence to the screen. The room dimmed as the video from the recovered memory card began to play. Grainy footage filled the chamber, the Calloway living room, a child's cry echoing, then the unmistakable crack of leather against skin. Gasps broke from the gallery. A woman in the front row pressed her hand to her mouth. On the screen, Brent's voice thundered, hateful and sharp. "No one will believe you. You are nothing." The mask crumbled. Brent's posture stiffened, sweat gathering at his temple. He tried to sit upright, but his eyes darted to the jury, searching for sympathy and finding none. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only when Judge Miriam Keats cleared her throat. Judge Keats, in her late 50s, carried authority with the ease of experience. Her silver hair was cut into a sharp bob, steel-rimmed glasses perched low on her nose. Before her appointment, she had prosecuted crimes against children, earning both respect and fear. Her lined face revealed no triumph, only gravity, as she looked over her glasses at the defendant. Let the record reflect that the evidence presented is both graphic and disturbing. The jury will consider it with full weight. The trial pressed on with testimony, Nora Whitaker's firm account of the rescue, Maria Lopez describing the evidence from the cellar, and Silas recounting the moment he saw his daughters in torn pink dresses, clinging to Ranger as if he were the only safe thing in the world. Each testimony chipped further at Brent's facade until the jury saw not a father, but a predator cloaked in politeness. When deliberations ended, the jury filed back, faces drawn with solemnity. The foreman, a middle-aged farmer with weathered hands, read the verdict. On the charges of aggravated assault and child endangerment, we find the defendant, Brent Calloway, guilty. The words rang through the chamber like a bell tolling the end of a masquerade. Brent slumped, his face ashen, his carefully groomed hair falling out of place. He muttered denials under his breath until the bailiff laid a firm hand on his shoulder. He looked no longer like the man who shook hands at church, but like a hollow figure stripped of disguise. Judge Keats delivered the sentence. 25 years in state prison. Her voice was clear, unwavering. May this serve as a reminder that cruelty behind closed doors remains cruelty, and justice will not turn away. The custody hearing followed swiftly. Papers were signed, arguments brief. For now, Grace and Hannah would remain with their father, Silas Ward. The decision was temporary but resolute, rooted in the testimony of those who had witnessed the bond between the girls and the man who had returned to protect them. Outside, the town stirred with unease. At the diner, whispers turned to sighs. At church pews, glances darted between parishioners who once welcomed Brent with trust. Walt Ellery, leaning on his shovel again, admitted he should have looked closer when he saw Hannah's downcast eyes. Joan Pike confessed to neighbors that she had mistaken silence for shyness. The lesson spread like a quiet tide. Children's voices must not be dismissed, their truths not hidden beneath polite masks. In the courthouse, Ranger shifted closer to Silas, pressing his head against the man's leg. For Silas, the gavel had fallen not just on Brent, but on his own silence of years past. His girls would come home with him now, and this time he vowed he would not leave them to fight shadows alone. The snow in Silver Pine began to retreat as March drew near, though the pines still wore heavy white cloaks on their branches. At the edge of the forest, tucked beneath a ridge, stood Silas Ward's cabin wood darkened by years of weather, chimneys sending thin threads of smoke into the crisp air. It wasn't large, but it was sturdy, and for the first time in years it was alive with the sound of children. Grace and Hannah padded across the wooden floors in mismatched socks, their voices tentative but lighter each day. The cabin smelled of maple syrup and coffee on mornings, of wood smoke by night. Silas had begun building what he called rituals, small acts to remind the girls that life could be predictable, safe, even joyful. Each morning he cooked waffles, letting the girls stir the batter, their giggles rising when Ranger nudged the bowl with his nose. When school mornings came, Ranger would sit by the door as if on inspection duty, sniffing each backpack before wagging his tail, declaring them ready for the world. The girls laughed at his seriousness, giving him the honorary title Sergeant Ranger. Silas watched these moments with a quiet reverence. He had been gone for too many years, lost in deployments and silence, but now he was learning fatherhood in reverse, starting not with lullabies, but with healing. At night he read stories by the fire, his deep voice steady, the crackle of the flames punctuating his words. Sometimes the girls leaned against him, sometimes they leaned against Ranger, and he understood that love needed no hierarchy. Grace, who had once spoken only in whispers, began to test her voice again. At first it was just a few words. "I'm fine," spoken cautiously, but soon it carried warmth. Hannah followed, adding bursts of laughter when Ranger tried to chase his tail or when Silas burned a pancake. The cabin echoed with something it had not held in years. Ordinary joy. One evening, when the girls woke from nightmares, Silas hurried to their room only to find Ranger already there, curled against them on the floor. His calm breathing steadied theirs until sleep returned. Silas stood at the door, his throat tightening with gratitude for the animal who had done what he once could not banish the dark with presence alone. Not every moment was solemn. Laughter crept in with surprising ease. One afternoon, Silas found Ranger on the porch with a half-eaten apple clamped in his jaws. Grace scolded him sternly, hands on her hips, declaring, "Stealing is bad, even for heroes." Hannah joined, insisting the punishment be a hug, so long Ranger's ears drooped with embarrassment. They wrapped their arms around his thick neck until his tail thumped forgiveness into the porch boards. Silas laughed, the sound rusty but real, and for a moment the cabin felt like a world stitched back together. Outside their walls, another thread of healing had begun. Evelyn Hart, the girl's mother, attended weekly classes in the church basement sessions for parents seeking to rebuild after failure. 35, auburn hair pulled back neatly, she carried the weight of her mistakes openly now. She wrote letters each night to her daughters, not yet mailed, pages filled with apologies and memories of lullabies she wished she had sung louder. "I was blind," she wrote, "and you paid the price. But I will not stop trying to earn the right to stand near you again." Her journey was long, but it was a step toward redemption, and Silas, though cautious, recognized that even broken roots could grow if tended. As spring teased its way through the pines, the evenings grew softer. One sunset, the girls sat on the cabin's porch in their pink dresses, cleaner now, hems brushing against their knees. The fading light painted them in hues of rose and gold, no longer colors of pain but of promise. Hannah leaned into Grace, whispering something that made them both laugh, and Silas stood in the doorway watching, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Ranger lay at their feet, his gaze sweeping the forest edge as if still on guard, but his tail rested easy against the wooden boards. The mountain air cooled quickly as night fell, but in the cabin warmth lingered, stitched into the rituals they had built: breakfast waffles, bedtime stories, Ranger's watchful patrols. They were fragile still, but they were whole, and that was enough. When we look back on Silas, his daughters, and the loyal German shepherd who never left their side, we are reminded that courage is not only found on battlefields or in courtrooms. Sometimes it begins in the quietest places, in a child daring to whisper the truth, in a father who refuses to look away, and in a dog who carries loyalty like a lantern through the dark. Too many voices, especially children's voices, are lost because the world dismisses them as small. But Lily, Grace, Hannah, every child who finds the strength to speak teaches us that silence can be broken, and healing can begin when someone truly listens. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what hope means to you, or what you believe it takes to truly protect those who cannot protect themselves. Your words may give someone else the courage to speak. And if you believe in stories that shine light into dark places, give this video a like, follow our page, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next story of hope, courage, and redemption.